For 20 years, she polished the silver he ate with and made the bed he slept in, praying the son she gave away would never look her in the eye and see the truth. She was the invisible woman in his luxurious home, hired to clean his mansion, knowing every detail of his life, while he knew nothing of hers. This was the unthinkable secret she carried, a hidden identity that would unravel a lifetime in a single, devastating moment. Her name was Elena, and the son she watched grow into a powerful CEO was named Daniel Carter. Decades earlier, she made an impossible choice, giving her newborn up to a wealthy, childless couple to secure his future, a future she believed she could never provide. Then she engineered a way back into his life, not as a mother, but as staff. This is the story of a secret that spanned a lifetime and the single, fragile thread of deception that threatened to snap it all apart. It began in the winter of 1982. Elena Vasquez was 19, alone, and cleaning offices at night to survive in a cramped studio apartment in downtown Philadelphia. The father of her unborn child had vanished when she told him the news, and her own family, strict and traditional, had made their disapproval devastatingly clear. She worked until her feet swelled, saving every penny, knowing with a crushing certainty that she could not give this baby the life he deserved. It was a social worker named Margaret who presented the file for Thomas and Elena Carter. He was a rising partner at a prestigious law firm. She was a philanthropist from old money. They lived in a historic brownstone in Society Hill, had been trying for a child for over a decade, and were described as kind, stable, and desperately wanting a family. To Elena, they were not just an option, they were a miracle. A closed adoption was arranged through a private agency, a common practice that sealed all records and promised a clean break. On a rainy April morning, Elena gave birth to a son. She named him Mateo for her grandfather and held him for 3 hours in a sterile hospital room, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the shape of his lips, the dark swirl of hair on his crown. She whispered promises into his skin that she feared she could never keep. Then she signed the papers, and he was gone. The grief that followed was not a single event, but a permanent climate. Research shows that for many birth mothers, this loss becomes a lifelong companion, with waves of sorrow hitting at anniversaries and milestones they can only imagine. Elena moved through the next 5 years in a numb haze, working days as a retail clerk and still cleaning at night. But she had one secret ritual. Every few months, she would take the bus to Society Hill, walk past the Carters' imposing brownstone, and sit on a bench across the street, hoping for a glimpse of a stroller or a little boy playing in the private garden. She saw him first when he was about 4, chasing a red ball with a nanny. He was dressed in a tiny coat and shiny shoes, laughing. Her heart cracked open. She knew then that her sacrifice had been the right one, but the price was an agony that never diminished. She promised herself she would be content with these stolen, distant glances, but fate and a ruthless determination had other plans. By the time her son, now named Daniel Carter, was 7, Elena had taught herself everything about high-end domestic service. She had taken courses in silver polishing, textile care, and formal table setting. She had worked her way up from cleaning houses to being a valued housekeeper for a family in the mainline suburbs. Her references were impeccable. Her goal was singular and quietly insane: to get a job in the Carter household. The opportunity came from a piece of gossip overheard at a grocery store. Another domestic worker mentioned that the Carters' longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Abbott, was retiring due to arthritis. The position would be open in 6 weeks. Elena applied with a resume that slightly blurred her timeline, using her current employer's name but not specifying dates. Elena Carter, impressed by her quiet demeanor and obvious skill, hired her after a single interview. On a bright Monday in September 1989, Elena Vasquez walked through the servants' entrance of the brownstone as an employee. She was given a simple blue uniform and a list of duties. Her first task was to dust the living room, which contained a grand piano and a portrait of a smiling, 8-year-old Daniel. For 20 years, Elena perfected the art of invisible proximity. She learned Daniel's favorite foods and made sure his favorite cookies were always in the jar. She repaired the torn knee of his favorite jeans before he could even mention it to his mother. She listened from the kitchen as he practiced piano, fought with his parents about curfews, celebrated college acceptances, and brought home his first serious girlfriend. She was the constant, quiet witness to the entirety of his life, absorbing every detail as a kind of sacred compensation for all she had missed. She watched him evolve from a boy into the driven, charismatic man who would eventually take over and expand his father's firm into a corporate empire. The Carters were good people, if somewhat distant, and they treated her with a benign, paternalistic kindness that never crossed into genuine intimacy. She was Elena, reliable and efficient, a fixture in the background. To Daniel, she was just part of the household machinery, the woman who ensured his world ran smoothly. He was polite, but he never truly saw her, and that was, professionally speaking, her greatest success. Personally, it was her daily crucifixion. The first major fracture in this carefully constructed world appeared not with a shout, but with a quiet medical diagnosis. Elena Carter was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. In her final months, she became reflective, often asking Elena to sit with her. During one of these afternoons, Elena, weakened by medication, grasped Elena's hand. "You've been so loyal to us, to Daniel," she whispered. "I sometimes think you care for him as if he were your own." Elena froze, her blood turning to ice. She simply nodded, unable to speak, convinced for a terrifying moment that the secret was known. But Elena just smiled faintly and drifted to sleep. She passed away 2 weeks later. Daniel, then 28, was devastated. His father, Thomas, retreated into grief and moved to a retirement community in Florida a year later, leaving Daniel alone in the now too quiet brownstone. He threw himself into work, building his empire, and the house became merely a place to sleep. Elena's role shifted from serving a family to preserving a museum of a childhood that was, in part, a fiction she had helped sustain. Daniel's success, however, attracted new attention. He began dating Catherine Thorne, a sharp, ambitious woman from a rival financial family. Catherine saw the brownstone not as a home, but as an asset, and Elena not as a legacy, but as outdated help. She insisted on modernizing, on bringing in a proper staff agency. She made pointed comments about Elena's age, her methods, the very fact that she had a key to Daniel's private study. For Elena, Catherine was not just a threat to her job, but a threat to her last remaining connection to her son. The tension in the house became a silent, cold war fought over laundry starch and appointment schedules. Then Daniel announced he was selling the brownstone. He and Catherine were buying a modern penthouse tower, a fresh start. He sat Elena down in the formal dining room, a room she had polished for 2 decades. "Elena, I want you to come with us," he said. "The new place is huge, and Catherine wants a full staff, but we need everyone to be integrated. There will be new protocols." His words were kind, but the message was clear: adapt or be left behind. Agreeing meant uprooting her entire life and entering Catherine's domain. Refusing meant losing Daniel forever. She agreed. The move to the sterile, glass-walled penthouse was Elena's undoing in slow motion. Catherine installed a house manager, a young man named Robert who viewed Elena with dismissive suspicion. Her access to Daniel was now filtered through layers of new staff and digital schedules. She was assigned to the laundry and linen rooms, deep in the service core of the apartment, far from the living spaces. The intimate proximity she had maintained for so long was replaced by a structured, corporate distance. The pain of this separation was a physical ache, but she endured because some connection, however frayed, was better than none. Then she found the letter. It was a Monday, her day to tidy Daniel's personal study, a task Catherine had unsuccessfully tried to reassign. In a drawer, beneath a stack of old financial reports, was a sealed, yellowing envelope addressed to Daniel in a familiar, elegant script, Elena Carter's handwriting. The letter was marked, "To be given to Daniel upon my death." It had clearly been forgotten by Thomas in his grief-moved haste. Elena's hands trembled. She knew she should leave it, should tell Daniel she found it. But a force stronger than reason took over. In the privacy of her small basement quarters, she carefully steamed the envelope open. What she read inside would not only shatter Daniel's understanding of his past, but would place Elena and her 20-year secret directly in the path of an explosion that was now inevitable. The letter revealed that Elena Carter had known, almost from the beginning. The letter was not a confession, but a warning. Elena Carter wrote that shortly after the adoption, a pang of conscience had led her to quietly request the original agency file, a move the private facilitator had called highly irregular. In it, she saw the name of the birth mother, Elena Maria Vasquez. She noted the similarity to their new housekeeper's name, but dismissed it as a tragic coincidence. Yet, over the years, small things accumulated. The intensity of Elena's care for Daniel, the way she would sometimes look at him with a bottomless sadness that no employee's loyalty could explain. Elena wrote that she had chosen, for the peace of her family and for Daniel's stable identity, to never investigate further. But she urged Daniel, if he was reading this, to remember that family is often a story we choose to believe, and sometimes the truth resides in the quietest people in the room. For Elena, the message was clear. Elena had suspected, but had died with her questions unanswered. The secret was still Elena's to keep, but it now lived in ink, a phantom in the house. Elena resealed the envelope with painstaking care, her mind racing. The safe choice was to slip it back into the drawer and forget she ever saw it, but the letter had shifted the ground beneath her. For 20 years, she had believed her deception was absolute. Now she knew that at least one person had seen through her, and that person had been the matriarch of the family. The paranoia was instant and corrosive. Did Thomas Carter know? Had he and Elena discussed it? Were there other letters, other documents? Every interaction with Daniel now felt like walking a tightrope over a newly revealed abyss. A few days later, while Daniel was on a business trip, Catherine decided to conduct an inventory review of the staff quarters, citing security protocols. Robert, the house manager, accompanied her. When they entered Elena's small sitting room, Catherine's eyes scanned the space like an auditor. "We just want to ensure everything is up to the building's code, Elena," she said, her tone sweetly poisonous, "and that personal items are appropriate." Elena stood frozen as Catherine glanced at her bookshelf, at the few framed photos, none of Daniel, only landscapes. Then Catherine's gaze landed on a small, carved wooden box on the nightstand. "What's in here?" she asked, already reaching for it. The box contained the only tangible pieces of Elena's past she allowed herself: a dried flower from her mother's grave, a saint's medal, and a single worn black and white ultrasound picture from 1983, the year technology first made those images common. It was grainy, showing only a vague, bean-shaped shadow. To anyone else, it was an anonymous keepsake. To Elena, it was a nuclear secret. "Just old mementos, ma'am," Elena said, her voice strained. "Nothing of value." Catherine picked up the ultrasound photo, held it to the light, and raised an eyebrow. A long time ago." She placed it back in the box, but the look she gave Elena was not one of dismissal. It was one of filing a datum away for future use. After they left, Elena sank onto her bed, trembling. The incident was a shot across the bow. Catherine was hunting for leverage, for any flaw to exploit to remove the old guard. Elena knew her continued presence in Daniel's life. The entire architecture of her sacrifice was now on a collision course with Catherine's ambition. The pressure catalyzed a reckless, desperate plan. If the letter existed, what else might? She needed to know the full extent of what Daniel could potentially discover. Using her old key, which she had never returned, she let herself into the now-sold brownstone one final night before the new owners took possession. It was empty, echoing, and full of ghosts. She went straight to Thomas Carter's old study, to a locked filing cabinet she remembered from years ago. Using a hairpin, a skill born of a much poorer life, she popped the simple lock. Inside were folders labeled taxes, property, will, and one tucked at the back labeled adoption D. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the complete original agency file Elena had referenced. With shaking hands, she opened it. There was her own teenage signature waiving her rights. There were the medical records. And there, paper-clipped to the back, was a handwritten note from the agency director to Thomas and Elena, a note they had never shared with her. It stated that the birth mother, EV, had been deemed particularly emotionally attached and may require monitoring for potential boundary issues post-placement. The director recommended complete geographic separation. They had flagged her as a potential risk from the very beginning. Elena felt the room tilt. Every kind word from Elena, every trust placed in her, now took on a horrifying new dimension. Had they hired her not despite who she was, but because of it? Was her entire employment a form of charitable surveillance, a way to keep the problematic birth mother close and controlled? The foundation of her 20-year narrative crumbled into dust. She wasn't a cunning mastermind who had infiltrated her son's life. She may have been a known quantity, a tolerated ghost invited in from the cold. The shame was hotter and more debilitating than any she had ever felt. She took the entire file. It was theft, but she felt it was a theft of her own history. She returned to the penthouse as dawn broke, the file hidden in her bag, feeling more like a stranger in her own life than ever before. A week later, the collision happened. Daniel, stressed from a major merger, misplaced a crucial physical contract. He blamed the new digital filing system and, in a rage, demanded a search of every room, including the staff areas. Robert and a security guard conducted the search. In Alina's quarters, the guard, being thorough, looked under her mattress. He pulled out the stolen adoption file. Robert, recognizing the Carter name on the tab, immediately took it to Catherine, who did not go to Daniel. She came to Alina. She summoned Alina to the pristine, cold living room. The file lay on the glass coffee table between them like an indictment. "Explain this," Catherine said, no pretense of courtesy remaining. Alina's world narrowed to a point. She could lie, claim she found it during the move and meant to return it. But the ultrasound picture was also in that box, and Catherine was too clever not to connect the dots. The silence stretched, and in that silence, Catherine's eyes widened with the dawning, monstrous realization. She looked from the file to Alina's face, to a recent portrait of Daniel on the mantel, and back to Alina. The pieces snapped together. "Oh my God," Catherine breathed, not in sympathy, but in a tone of pure strategic astonishment. "You're her, you're the birth mother." The secret was out. But not with Daniel, with the one person who would weaponize it. Catherine did not scream or call security. She slowly sank into a white leather chair, her initial shock hardening into something cold and calculative. "This explains so much," she said, almost to herself. "The obsession, the resistance to change. You've been lying to him, to this family, for his entire life." Alina stood her ground, the fear now morphing into a defiant, protective rage. "I have loved him for his entire life," she corrected, her voice low but firm. "From the moment he was born, everything I did was to be near him." Catherine waved a dismissive hand. "Spare me the martyrdom. You engineered a massive fraud. You manipulated a grieving family. Do you have any idea what this would do to Daniel's public image, to the stability of the company? His investors see a self-made man with a legacy. This is a tawdry psychological mess." She leaned forward. "Here is what is going to happen. You will submit your resignation immediately, citing personal health reasons. You will leave the city. In return, I will not show him this file. I will preserve the memory of his parents and his own sanity. You will finally do for him what you should have done decades ago: disappear." Alina felt the ultimatum like a physical blow. It was the nightmare scenario, dressed up as a mercy. To walk away now after being discovered would mean Catherine controlled the narrative forever. Daniel would only remember his strange, devoted housekeeper who abruptly left. He would never know why. The thought was unbearable. "No," Alina said. The word hung in the sterile air. Catherine's eyes narrowed. "No, I will not leave without telling him the truth myself." Catherine laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You think he'll thank you? You think he'll embrace you? Research is very clear on this, Alina. What you're describing is called secondary rejection. Adoptees who search for birth parents often face anger, confusion, and outright denial. You are not his mother in any way that matters to him. You are a stranger with a disturbing secret. Telling him will only shatter him and destroy any lingering goodwill he might feel for you. I am offering you a graceful exit. Take it." But Alina had read the same research in her own lonely, desperate hours. She knew the risks of traumatic reunion, of the adoptee's sense of betrayal. Yet she also knew the studies that showed contact, when handled with care, could lead to healing. Catherine was weaponizing the darkest possible outcome as a threat. "If I go to him first," Alina said, her mind racing, "it comes from a place of love. If he finds out from you, or from some leaked scandal, it comes from a place of betrayal and manipulation. You want to control this to control him." A flicker of anger crossed Catherine's perfectly composed face. She had been seen through. "You have 24 hours to change your mind," she stated, standing up. "After that, I will protect my future husband from you by any means necessary." She took the adoption file and left the room, leaving Alina standing alone, the walls of her life collapsing inwards. Alina knew Catherine would not wait. The any means necessary was a promise. She had to get to Daniel first, but he was at a critical offshore meeting in Zurich, unreachable for the next 36 hours. It was a window of vulnerability. She retreated to her quarters, her mind a storm of panic and resolve. She had to prepare to find a way to make him understand. But as she sat at her small desk, a deeper, more terrifying thought surfaced. Catherine had the original agency file. What if there was something in there, beyond what Alina had seen, that was even worse? What if her own memories of that time were incomplete? The seed of doubt, planted by Alina's letter, now grew into a full-blown terror. She had to know everything Catherine knew. Meanwhile, Catherine was not idle. She contacted a private investigator she had used before for corporate due diligence. "I need a deep dive on an Elena Maria Vasquez, born circa 1963 in Philadelphia. I need everything: family, medical history, financials, any arrests, any aliases, and I need it yesterday." She then placed a call to Martin Bryce, Daniel's most aggressive rival on the board, a man who had always been suspicious of Daniel's rapid rise. "Martin, it's Catherine. I may have come across some information regarding Daniel's background that could impact board confidence. I'd value your discretion and your advice." She was building a net, not just to remove Elena, but to insulate herself and gain leverage over Daniel in the coming corporate power struggles. The secret was no longer just a family tragedy, it was becoming a corporate weapon. The investigators' preliminary report arrived within 12 hours. It contained a fact that made Catherine's blood run cold, then heat with opportunistic fury. Elena's father, according to a buried police report from 1978, had been briefly investigated for fraud, a small-time con targeting elderly immigrants. The case was dropped for lack of evidence, but the stain was there. More explosively, the investigator found a record of a psychological evaluation Elena had undergone at the adoption agency's request. The summary, written by a now-deceased psychologist, described a young woman with attachment pathologies and potential for obsessive behavior stemming from early familial abandonment. It was the clinical, damning version of the note in the file. Catherine now had a narrative. Daniel Carter, raised by pillars of society, was actually the grandson of a suspected conman and the son of a woman deemed psychologically unstable by professionals. In the world of high-stakes finance and old-money society, this was kryptonite. Catherine decided to accelerate her plan. She wouldn't wait for Elena to resign. She would force a confrontation with Daniel upon his return, using the information to frame Elena not as a loving mother, but as a calculated infiltrator with a troubled, possibly dangerous background. She would present herself as the clear-eyed protector who uncovered the threat. She drafted a succinct, brutal dossier, combining the adoption file, the psychological note, and the report on Elena's father. She intended to show it to Daniel the moment he landed, but she made one critical, arrogant mistake. She left the physical dossier on her private desk in the penthouse study, believing Elena was too cowed to enter her space. Elena, however, was past fear. The night before Daniel's return, she slipped into Catherine's study. She saw the dossier, her own life reduced to a few damning pages. As she flipped through, she saw the psychologist's note. The words attachment pathologies and obsessive behavior hit her like punches. This was how her deepest pain was being codified and weaponized. But next to it, paper-clipped, was a printed email chain between Catherine and Martin Bryce. The subject line read, "Leverage Ray Carter Paternity." Scanning it, Elena's breath caught. Catherine wasn't just planning to expose her. She was plotting with Bryce to use the revelation to question Daniel's judgment and stability publicly, to force him to cede certain board controls in exchange for their silence. Daniel's empire, not just his heart, was the real target. Elena's secret was the Trojan horse for a hostile takeover of his life's work. This changed everything. It was no longer just about a mother and son. It was about saving Daniel from utter ruin. She couldn't just tell him the emotional truth. She had to arm him with the evidence of the plot against him. She took pictures of the key documents with her old flip phone, the dossier, and the incriminating emails. She then returned to her room, knowing the next move was Catherine, and that it would come fast and hard. The stage was set for a collision that would break every secret wide open, not with a whisper, but with a war. Daniel's plane was touching down, and he was walking into a home that was now a battlefield, completely unaware that the woman who had ironed his shirts for 20 years held the key to saving everything he thought he knew. Daniel returned from Zurich exhausted, his mind still parsing the final details of the merger. The penthouse was silent, but the tension in the air was as thick as the bulletproof glass in its windows. Catherine met him in the foyer, her expression a masterful blend of concern and gravity. "We need to talk. It's urgent and it's about Elena." She led him to the study, bypassing any welcome. On the desk lay the dossier. "Before you say anything, please read this, for your own protection." Daniel, confused and irritable from jet lag, opened the folder. He saw his own birth certificate, then the adoption papers, then the psychological assessment. His eyes scanned the lines, his face draining of color. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's the truth," Catherine said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Elena Vasquez is your biological mother. She gave you up, then spent 20 years deceiving our family to get close to you. The agency warned them about her instability. Daniel, she's been lying to you every single day. This isn't loyalty, it's pathology." Daniel pushed back from the desk as if burned. He stared at the documents, then at Catherine. A lifetime of memories with Elena, her quiet presence, her knowing looks, her excessive care snapped into a horrifying new configuration. The betrayal felt fundamental, a crack in the foundation of his entire history. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice a low rumble. "In her quarters. I've suspended her. Security is on standby." Daniel turned and walked out of the study, not towards the staff wing, but to the main living area. He needed space to breathe. Catherine followed, confident the first blow had landed perfectly. Elena, who had been waiting in the service hall, heard them. She took a deep, steadying breath and stepped into the living room. Daniel turned, and the look on his face, a mixture of hurt, anger, and utter confusion, pierced her heart. "Daniel," she began. "Don't," he cut her off, holding up a hand. "Is it true, all of it?" "Yes," she said, her voice clear despite the tremor in her hands. "I am your mother. I gave you up to Thomas and Elena Carter when you were born. And I have worked in this house, in your life, ever since you were 8 years old." The admission, spoken aloud after so many decades, hung between them. Daniel shook his head, struggling to reconcile the woman he'd seen as a kind, dependable employee with this staggering reality. Why would you do this? Why not just tell me?" "Because I was 19, broke and terrified," Elena said, tears finally spilling over. "I believed the Carters could give you everything I couldn't. And by the time I had built a life stable enough to even consider being near you, you were already a little boy in that house, with a family. I thought if I just got a job here, I could watch over you. I never intended to interfere. I just needed to be near you. It was selfish, and it was wrong, and I have lived with the weight of that deception every single day." Catherine stepped forward. Daniel listened to her. "She admits it was selfish. She admits it was wrong. This is exactly the kind of obsessive behavior the psychologist noted. She needs help and you need distance." But Daniel was still looking at Elena, seeing past the uniform for the first time, seeing the age in her face, the gray in her hair, the profound anguish in her eyes. "My parents," he said slowly, "did they know?" This was the question that had haunted Elena. "Your mother, Elena." "She suspected. She wrote you a letter, which I found. She chose not to investigate, to protect your peace. I don't believe she ever told your father." Daniel absorbed this, the image of his elegant, reserved mother keeping such a secret, adding another layer of complexity to his crumbling past. It was then that Elena knew she had to play her final card. "But this," she said, gesturing to the dossier Catherine held, "this is not about protecting you, Daniel. It's about controlling you. Ask her about Martin Bryce. Ask her about the board controls." Catherine's composure slipped. "She's deflecting, she's trying to twist this." Daniel's eyes, sharp from 1,000 negotiations, flicked to Catherine. "Martin Bryce, what does he have to do with this?" Catherine stammered. I sought his counsel, as a board member, on how to handle the potential fallout for the company." "No," Elena interrupted. She pulled the old flip phone from her pocket. "You sought his partnership, to use this scandal to question Daniel's judgment and force him to cede power. I have pictures of the emails." She handed the phone to Daniel. He scrolled through the blurry but legible images. His expression shifted from personal hurt to cold, calculated fury. He saw the language: leverage, paternity issue, instability, board confidence. This was not a protective move, it was a corporate coup. He looked from Elena, who had deceived him for love, to Catherine, who had plotted against him for power. The scales tipped irrevocably. "You used this," he said to Catherine, his voice like ice. "You took the most vulnerable part of my life and turned it into a weapon for a hostile takeover." "I was trying to secure our future," Catherine protested. "Our future," Daniel echoed. "You were conspiring with my biggest rival to dismantle my authority. Get out, now, your engagement is over. Your access is revoked. My lawyers will be in touch regarding your severance and the return of all company property." Catherine stood frozen, her grand plan evaporating in seconds. She looked at Elena with pure venom, then turned and walked out, her heels clicking a staccato of defeat on the marble floor. The silence that followed was immense. Daniel sank onto a sofa, running his hands over his face. Elena remained standing, unsure of her place, of everything. After a long minute, he spoke without looking up. All those years, the cookies, the mended jeans, the way you always knew, he trailed off. I was trying to mother you in the only way I thought I was allowed, Elena whispered. It was never enough, and it was too much. Daniel finally looked at her. What do you want from me now? It was the question at the heart of every adoption reunion, fraught with hope and fear. Elena met his gaze. Nothing you are not ready to give. I want you to know you were always loved by me, even from a distance. I want you to be well, and if you can find it in your heart, I would like the chance in time to know you, not as your housekeeper, but as Elena. Daniel didn't answer immediately. The psychological whiplash was severe, but the evidence of Catherine's betrayal had, in a terrible way, contextualized Elena. One was manipulation for gain, the other was a deeply flawed, tragic attempt for connection. I need time, he said, which was both a rejection of immediate closeness and an acknowledgement that the door was not permanently shut. It was more than Elena had dared hope for. Of course, she said. She turned to leave, to pack her things, to give him the space he needed. Where will you go? He asked, the practical CEO reasserting itself. I have a little savings, I'll find a place, she said. Daniel shook his head. No, there's a guest cottage on the property in the Hamptons. It's empty, go there, stay as long as you need. We'll figure out the rest later. It was not forgiveness, but it was an act of grace, a thread of connection he was not yet ready to sever. Elena nodded, tears welling again, this time from a place of fragile hope. In the weeks that followed, Daniel threw himself into dismantling Catherine's plot. He confronted Martin Bryce with the emails, forcing his resignation from the board. He had his lawyers send a cease and desist to Catherine, who ultimately left the city quietly. The corporate threat was neutralized, but the personal work was slower. He read his mother's letter, wept, and visited his father in Florida, having a long, painful conversation that revealed Thomas had been blissfully unaware. Daniel began therapy, grappling with the dual betrayals and his reconfigured identity. He drove to the Hamptons one weekend. He found Elena in the cottage garden, not in a uniform, but in simple clothes. They had tea on the porch, speaking haltingly of neutral things, the garden, the weather, a book. It was awkward, but it was a start. He learned about her life, her struggles, her regrets. She learned about his childhood from his perspective, the pressures he felt, the loneliness he'd never admitted. The bonds did not magically form, but a new, honest foundation began to be laid, brick by painful brick. The final surprise came a year later, during the sorting of his father's estate after Thomas passed away. Among his father's personal effects was a safe deposit box key. In the box, Daniel found a sealed envelope with his name in Elena's handwriting and a smaller, older envelope addressed to Elena. The letter to him was a fuller version of the first, expressing her love and her hope that he would find peace with whatever truths he discovered. The older envelope contained a single, faded check, dated 1989, made out to Elena Vasquez from Elena Carter for a significant sum of money. It was never cashed. Attached was a note in Elena's hand. For her silence or for her comfort, I could not decide. She never asked for anything. I will never know if I did the right thing. Daniel realized then that his mother had not just suspected. She had knowingly paid the woman she believed to be his birth mother to stay, transforming Elena's secret vigil into a silently sanctioned arrangement. The truth was even more complex and intertwined than he had imagined. He brought the check to Elena. She stared at it, then began to cry, not for the money, but for the acknowledgement. She knew, Elena said, and she let me stay. She gave me the greatest gift she could. In that moment, Daniel felt the last of his anger towards Elena dissolve, replaced by a profound, sorrowful understanding of the webs of silence and sacrifice that had bound them all. He didn't have a traditional family, but he had a story, and now he had the beginnings of something real with the woman who had ironed his shirts, the mother who had never left. The journey towards healing was long, but for the first time, it was walking a path in the light. The story of Elena and Daniel is more than a tale of a hidden identity. It is a profound map of the human heart's capacity for sacrifice, deception, and ultimately, fragile repair. It forces us to ask where the line falls between a lie told for love and a truth withheld for protection. For 20 years, Elena lived in the narrow space between those two concepts, her every action a silent prayer for proximity, her entire existence a monument to a choice made in a moment of desperate hope. Daniel's journey mirrors the complex reality faced by countless adoptees who discover life-altering truths later in life, a seismic shift in personal history that demands the rebuilding of a self from new and often painful raw materials. Their story underscores a painful truth documented in adoption research, that secrecy, no matter the intention, casts a long shadow. It creates parallel realities, one for the parent who grieves in silence and one for the child who grows in ignorance. When those realities collide, the impact is psychological whiplash. Yet within that collision, there is also the potential for a deeper, more authentic connection, one built not on a perfect story, but on an acknowledged shared history of loss and longing. What began as a mother's impossible sacrifice and a son's unexamined privilege ended as a mutual, hard-won recognition. They did not find a storybook ending, but something more real, a complicated, messy beginning. This narrative invites us to look at the quiet people in our own lives, the background figures whose stories we never think to ask for. It asks us to consider the weight of our own secrets and the price we pay to carry them. We often believe that the past, once buried, stays buried. But the heart has its own archaeology, and love, in its most powerful forms, has a relentless gravity that pulls hidden things to the surface, not to destroy, but to demand integration. The miracle here was not the revelation itself, but the courage both people found to face it, to choose understanding over total rejection, and to tentatively build a bridge across a chasm of decades. Their resolution did not erase the pain or the lost years, but it transformed the secret from a weapon that could destroy into a story that could, eventually, heal. It proves that while we cannot rewrite our pasts, we have agency over how we carry them forward. Redemption is not about erasing mistakes, but about having the courage to meet their consequences with honesty and grace. Elena and Daniel's journey reminds us that our most profound connections are often waiting in the spaces between the roles we are assigned, in the quiet, loving persistence that exists beyond words and uniforms, in the unwavering hope that even the most fractured bonds can find a path toward light. If this story of hidden truths and revealed hearts resonated with you, if it made you think about the quiet sacrifices and unspoken stories in your own world, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to join us for more deep dives into the extraordinary stories hidden in ordinary lives. Until next time.